If you would like to follow along with me, we'll be in the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 3. As we prepare our hearts for the coming up of the Christmas season, we want to kind of take some time and to think about this ultimate promise that we have been given through the revelation of God's Word, the gospel message that we have in its entirety. And one of the first places we want to stop and look is where that first hint of a coming Savior is pronounced. At the very time that humanity makes its biggest mistake, we get this glimpse, not the full, complete picture, but of something that is coming, of this disfellowship that we all of a sudden have with God, but there is one that's going to come that's going to bring us back. We're stranded, apart, separated from this, what we were originally created to be. But there's one that was to come, that was going to come and to rescue us, to save us, and to bring us back into relationship. And so we find that in Genesis chapter 3. But to set the context, we want to remember that in Genesis chapter 1, we read of the creation that God had made, and that he does all this stuff in 6 days, and he pronounces it as very good. In other words, what we would use in our language is perfect. Nothing is wrong with what he has made. And then it kind of zooms in chapter 2 to the 6th day of creation, and God gives us a little bit more detail. What was it like when I made humanity and Adam and Eve and this garden that I created for them to be a part of, and what was the looks of it? And we have to be a little bit careful of the markers in there of the different rivers, because there was a global flood that came afterwards that would have changed the geography of the landscape. But they're using language that is close to what they knew of things that was handed down from them, and maybe some markers of some areas of where, supposedly it was supposed to be. We don't know exactly how all that falls in with the markers. But the context is the beauty of what God has created and has made for humanity as he's given them dominion over the earth and the task of to work the land and to till it. But then we have chapter 3 jump in there and telling us what transpired in those moments. So Genesis chapter 3, starting in verse 1. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the beasts of the field that Yahweh God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God actually say, 'You shall not eat of any tree in the garden'?" So we're introduced to this serpent, and it's interesting that in the context of Genesis, we're never told it's Satan, and we're really not told in hardly any of the Old Testament that it's Satan. It's more in the New Testament that we're given this revelation, but it was known that that's who he was, because we read of hints of that in 2 Corinthians and some other pieces of that, and we're going to see in the context of what we look at today of how we know that it's Satan even at this time that was indwelling this serpent. But the serpent was more crafty than all the beasts. And he poses a question to the woman, to Eve. Did God actually say? Because we've talked about this before, as Satan doesn't always change his tactics, the principles are the same. We're going to look at the principles of what he did to Adam and Eve to prepare ourselves for the attacks that we're going to have. Remember, we looked at the armor of God that we're supposed to put on, and it's there to help us against the schemes of the enemy. And so to see how he even started with the very beginning of sin is important for us to know, so we can withstand against those schemes as well, because he's going to be attacking us with the exact same things as he did. So the first thing he does is he tries to misrepresent God. And he asks her, "Did God actually say?" And he gives us this quote, and I have it on the top of our screen, of "You shall not eat of any tree of the garden." Now in Genesis chapter 2, verse 16, we have the quote of what God told Adam when he created things and gave him the warning of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and all the other trees he could eat. And this is what God said in the bottom of the screen: "You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die." I highlighted in the bottom section of what Satan quoted of God. And if you'll notice, he doesn't add anything to God's word. It is kind of correct. God did say those words, but what did he do? He rearranged them. He left details out. He misrepresents God. He words it in the negative by saying, "Did God really say this?" And then he misrepresents it in a way to put a negative twist onto it. Really, you're not supposed to eat any of these trees? Well, the information's correct. That was a phrase that God used, but not in the context that Satan uses it to Eve. It's a reminder for us. Have we ever been misrepresented? Has somebody ever said something about us that wasn't true? Have they ever twisted your words in ways that it wasn't correct what they had to say? It's awful tough. Because like they say, all it takes is an accusation, and a lot of times other people will believe it. And we know how frustrating that is for us and how hurtful it can be because people hear these misrepresentations of us and then they go along believing it, and it's the exact same thing Satan does to God. If I say it, they might just believe it. And he starts to misrepresent that way. I'm going to use an analogy that has no value whatsoever to the application of what I'm saying. And I purposely chose that so we don't have to try to define what the answer is. All right, so I don't really believe what I'm going to say. I'm just doing it as an illustration. But it would be, to me, to represent the idea of the makers of this mask to say, at Halloween, you let your kids put on a ferocious beast mask. All right, I word it in a negative to try to misrepresent maybe what your intentions are or even the creators of this mask. They made a ferocious beast mask. And I'm going to word it in a negative way so it starts to cast a little bit of doubt into your mind of this is an appropriate thing to do. And that's what Satan does to Eve, and it's the same thing that you and I, and especially the youth that are in here, that he is going to be scheming to try to do to you. He is going to take ideas about God, and a lot of times he's going to have a lot of correct words in there, and he's going to bring it up in the negative to you and be like, did God really say this? Is this really who he is? And the whole point is to try to cast a little bit of doubt into your mind of who your God is. So how does Eve respond to this? We read of that in the latter part, in verse 2. And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. Now it's important for us to take a little bit of a look at how Eve responds, because it gives us an idea of how the deception of the enemy can so work into our lives by the response she gives. So the first part, let's look at what she has to say. She says, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden. Again, I highlighted the quote of what she said, of what God actually said. You may surely eat of every tree of the garden. She does a pretty good job, quotes most of what God has to say, but you notice some very important words that she left out. Surely, you may surely eat. You might also translate that as freely. You may freely eat of every tree. She left out the part of every tree. The freedom that they had, the emphasis that God put onto that, all these trees. You may freely eat any of these things. Eve doesn't mention that part. She just says we can eat of the fruit of the trees. She missed the freedom part. You can see how just subtly it seems that Satan's work of just misrepresenting God is slowly working in her mind. She forgot some of the most vital information that God gave her about her freedom and everything that he gave her that was to her access. It just was kind of like, yeah, we got a lot that God has given us. But then she goes on to express. She says that God told them, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. And again, just to remind us of what God had originally said, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. I have again highlighted in the bottom the parts that she actually quoted of what God had to say, and you notice there's not a whole lot there that she said. And direct quotes aren't important, but it's important for us to know how well she knew God and what happens. Actually, a more important thing with her response is looking back up at what she had to say and noticing what she changed. She uses the term in the midst of the garden instead of God's term of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. She took the principle of what God was saying, of this tree represents knowledge of good and evil, don't touch it, and she changes it just to a location. She missed the point. It's like when we just look at these rules and regulations God gives us instead of understanding the principle that lies behind them. And that's where she was at. Oh, there's this tree in the middle, and God tells us not to eat that one. And that's like us when we walk through life and we say, God tells us to do this, not to do this. I don't really know why not to do this and why to do this thing, but that's what he says, and so I'm just going to go along with it. It's a great heart, but the problem is when we get attacked with it then, we don't know the basis of why. And so when the devil and his scheme starts questioning us, boy, I don't know if that's a good idea what God's doing there. We think, oh, they might be right. She just switched it around, doesn't understand the authority of what God was saying. It was about it being the knowledge of good and evil. That's why they weren't supposed to eat it. It wasn't its location that was important. And then she says that we are never to touch it, or neither touch it, lest they die. That's added information. Now, I don't know what her heart is, and we cannot go there. We're not told what Eve's heart is on adding this to it, if it was parameters that she put on or what it was. But it's information that wasn't there. And then she says, "Least you die," is what God said. Now, it doesn't seem all that important, and we don't see this necessarily in the English, but God's phrase there of "you shall surely die" is used in a grammatical tense in Hebrew to speak of the most forceful way to say something. This is definitely going to happen, and she takes that out, and she just replaces it with, we might die. It's that idea of when we take God's proclamation of what he has to do for judgment, and we downplay it. And we don't really take God as being God very serious anymore. And it's the same thing that Eve started doing. God declared, this is for sure going to happen if you disobey me. And she just turns it into, there's a punishment if we don't follow this. That's what I love about how our last growth group, we went through the book of Leviticus, because it's a book that most Christians are like, I don't want to read about Leviticus. But it's in reading about that and understanding God's heart and why he asked Israel to do those things that you really start understanding this is serious. To worship him, you had to be in a certain state of purity. That was an important thing that he focused on for them. And if you did wrong things, then there was something that had to die because you had done wrong. There are serious things to rebelling against God, and there's serious things about having fellowship with him. And sometimes as Christians, we miss that, and we fall into what Eve kind of did there and go, there's a consequence if we don't do something wrong. It's almost when we focus too much on God's love and grace and mercy, and we forget he's a God of justice as well. He says there's some things, if you choose to willfully do these things and continue in them and be okay doing them, there are these consequences for it. But then we take those mentalities and go, but he's a God of love, grace, and mercy. It's not that big of a deal. I can keep doing them. And we fall in line of what Eve does, where we downplay the warnings that God has given us. So what does Satan do next? We read this in verse 4. But the serpent said to the woman, "You shall not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So Satan changes his tactics up now, and now he's going to question God's goodness. You notice with the subtleties, I don't think Eve understood what she was doing in her responses, but Satan surely did. We notice the ways that she was leaving vital information out, changing the consequences to not being so severe, kind of misrepresenting even the problem. I don't even understand why I'm not supposed to eat this tree. It's just in the midst of the garden. And Satan caught on to that. And he realized that he had cast doubt into Eve's mind, and she was not very strong at where she was standing. And so now he's going to expound on what he just did. And that's the same scheme he's going to do with you and I. As he casts doubt towards us, on misrepresenting God, and how our reactions are into our thought process and how we respond back to that, he's going to know whether he has hooked us or not. And if he has hooked us, he's going to start expounding and starting to attack the goodness of God and trying to wipe away your faith. Remember, as we looked at the armor of God, we need to have the shield of faith. We need to know why we believe the things that we believe. And what he noticed with Eve, it was like she had her shield up of who God was, but when he cast that doubt of, did God really say this? It's like with her response, he noticed that she kind of let it down a little bit. Satan goes, it's a perfect opportunity to attack again. So now he attacks, and what happens is his attack now is going to dull her sword. He noticed it wasn't very sharp. She couldn't even truly understand what God had told her before. So her weapon back at him was not very sharp. Her shield has went down, and so now he's going to take a frontal attack directly at her and what she has to say. So Satan attacks her with three concepts of the goodness of God. The first one, he tells her, it's a blatant lie, you're surely not going to die. It's very interesting that Satan actually quotes God correctly. He uses that very forceful language of saying, you will surely not die. He knew what God had said, even though Eve didn't. And then the second attack that he gives her is he says, you know what? Actually, you will gain knowledge. Your eyes will be opened. There are things out there that you don't know that God hasn't allowed you to know. God's not good. And the third one is he says, one of those things that eyes are going to be open with, you're going to know the difference between good and evil. So in other words, we could say the statement that Satan was saying to Eve, and the exact same thing he's going to try to be telling us through his schemes in this world, is God is not good and gracious. He's selfish and deceptive. In other words, God is holding you back. And that is the attack the enemy is going to try to tell each and every one of us as he tries to misrepresent God and then try to tear down his goodness. What he's asking Eve is he says, you have the belt of truth of God on, but that's not the right truth. Cast that aside and put on my truth. As we see, the consequences as we looked at the armor of God is that exactly what Eve and Adam are going to do. They're going to take off their belt of truth. God isn't my ultimate authority. And they're going to take on Satan's, and it's going to destroy the world that God had created. It's a serious thing to put on the armor of God. But we need to take a look at what Satan had to say, because this is what the world's going to tell us, and it's true. So let's look at what are these claims that Satan said, these three things of God's goodness. He says, you will surely not die. And guess what? He was correct. They didn't die immediately. Wait a minute. Maybe what he's having to say is right. What was the second thing he told them? You'll gain knowledge. Did they gain knowledge? Yeah. They realized they're naked. They didn't know that before. They gained knowledge. He was correct in what he had to tell them. The third thing, you'll know the difference between good and evil. And we're told at the end of chapter 3 that God had to kick them out of the garden because they knew the difference between good and evil. Wait a minute, everything that Satan said was correct. That's what's so hard about the schemes of the devil. He gives correct information, just like he did to misrepresent God. The information was correct, it just wasn't true. It was correct that those words came out of God's mouth, just not in the correct order. It's true, purposely not saying that word, it is correct what he had to say, but it's not truth because he left out a lot of details of what's going on. And that is the scheme of the enemy. And that's why it's so hard, because when they attack us in his schemes, they're going to say things that are going to sound very correct. And if we don't have our shield of faith on and we don't understand the gospel message of what we're supposed to go and proclaim and have that authority, it's going to win, because the things that are said are going to sound so right. Because in a way, they're correct. They're just not all of the information. That for way, they're not true. We looked at that last week, right? You can't have half truth. It's like saying I made a half jump, and we watched that cat make a half jump. It failed the jump. All right? To have half truth means you have false information. So even though Satan has correct information in here, it's not true because it's not all of it, and the extra information is so vital to know. So they didn't die immediately. Yes, he was right with that. But that wasn't what God was talking about. Death in the Bible talks about separation from him. And they had that immediately. They were immediately separated from fellowship with God. Yes, God still communicates with them, and to our grace, he still communicates to us while we're sinners, but we don't have a relationship with him. And that was broken and severed, and that's why they had to get kicked out of the garden to begin with. And it's that reminder of physical death is supposed to be a representation to us of what's going on spiritually when we talk about death. So when we have a loved one who passes away, we realize we no longer have contact with them. We don't get to see them anymore. And so that physical death is a representation of what our spiritual life is like. So when we spiritually are dead to God, we are broken from him. We have no contact with him, per se, no relationship. That's why in the New Testament it talks about us being born again. We were dead before, but now we have new life to have a relationship with God. And that's why the New Testament will talk about how the people didn't die who were Christians, but they had fallen asleep. All right, death is about separation, and the ultimate image is a separation from God. Otherwise, we'd have to say that God was lying, because he did say, you will surely die if you eat of this fruit. And the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Well, they didn't physically die, because that's not what he was talking about. It's spiritual. So Satan was right. They didn't die, but he wasn't talking about the right information. It was spiritual. Their eyes were opened. Yeah, they did gain knowledge. They realized that they were naked. But what did that bring about? Now all of a sudden they had a knowledge of what guilt and shame feels like. How many of us are so excited that we brought that into the world, going, boy, God was really holding us back. You know, if I didn't know what guilt and shame felt like, man, I would be missing out in this world. Was he really holding that back from us because it was such a great thing that we needed to navigate this world? No. Satan didn't tell her that part, though. The knowledge that you're going to gain is all the stuff that's going to make you feel miserable. All right? There's a purpose why God didn't want us to know what guilt and shame felt like. And then the added part of knowing the difference between good and evil, yes, he was correct. They did learn the difference between knowing good and evil, but again, was that something that's necessarily a good thing? With Adam and Eve's first rebellion against God, they were enticed to rebel against him. Somebody, Satan, came in and said, he's not right, you should do this other thing. They didn't think of that themselves. Adam and Eve didn't sit around and say, hey, let's go eat that fruit. No, somebody had to put that into their mind of saying, there's something about that fruit that you should like. The sad part is, though, now we know good and evil. So now we can think that stuff up ourselves. And we know the things that we can do that are wrong. And sadly, we have a desire in our hearts to do them. That's what Paul talks about in Romans, of saying this is so hard in the flesh because of the things I want to do because God has asked me to do them, I find that I don't do them at all. And the things that God tells me don't do because these are bad, I find that I end up doing those things. He says, my spirit's willing, my spirit wants to obey God, but my flesh is weak and I fall for it. That's the knowing the good and evil. Now we know how to do evil and we start desiring to do evil. Is that necessarily a good thing? Were we missing out on that when God says, oh, you're not going to know how to do bad things? Or actually, I shouldn't even say know how to do bad things. Have the desire to do bad things. No, it was a blessing. We had free will, but we didn't have to choose to do bad. But we had the capability to be able to do that. But we had to be enticed first. Now we can willfully choose that. So again, Satan was correct in everything he had to say, but he left out a lot of vital information. So he gave her just enough information to want to rebel against God instead of making a good decision. And that is the exact same thing that Satan, again, is going to do to you and I, of attack God's goodness. So again, to take back this analogy, it would be like me adding to this going, you know, lions kill innocent animals. And the males are chauvinists. They sit around and make the women go and do all the work of killing the prey, and then they come up and they chase them all away to have their feast, and then they get to come and go in. And you're going to let your kid go around and be representation of this thing? Horrible. All right? This is misrepresenting. I'm going to give you enough negative information that if this was actually something important, you might start believing me. Because negativity is contagious. And the more we're around it, we start thinking, oh, you might be right. And again, a lot of the information I told you was correct, but I'm just not giving you all the information about what it is about that. And so if we're not prepared, if we don't have the armor of God on and have our shield of faith where we know the extra information, we start falling for those casting of negative information. You do start thinking, wow, maybe they're right. What they're saying is correct. And the sad part is then we start tuning out the truth of what God has to say because, wait, no, I heard these people, they're right. And the sad thing is as Christians, if we don't have a good reason for the hope that is in us, then they don't sway to our way when we come back and we try to counter the things that the enemy has said. Because we don't always have sometimes correct information. We just have sometimes passionate information. Jesus loves you. He's going to help you get through whatever you want to get through. Well, that's not the same thing, though, that was enticing me with the schemes of the enemy. He was giving me correct information, not just about emotions. But he's giving me facts. You have to be so careful of that. Satan's going to be giving out that correct fact, but just not in the correct context where you get all the information out. And so then we read in verse 6, so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes and that the tree was a desire to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. And we looked at that last week, of the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life that he enticed her with, same things we get enticed here. But what I want to pick up with is she gave some to her husband, and he ate also. So they took off that belt of truth. They don't longer believe in God's truth, cast that to the side. And they rebelled against God, and she entices Adam to come with her. So Satan enticed Eve. Eve enticed Adam. We see in the book of Job that Job is enticed by his wife to curse God and die. And we see that Peter is used by Satan to try to convince Jesus not to even go to the cross. And it's a reminder to us that Satan's policy is to send temptations to us by unsuspecting means and hands. Sometimes it's the people that we least expected are the ones that he is using to try to influence us. Because they're the ones that have the most interest in us, and therefore they're the ones that have the most influence over us. And the reason I say that is not don't trust your friends. I word that to us to say, let's make sure we're not the ones that Satan is using to bring down our brothers and sisters. Because when we choose not to put on the armor of God, and we start falling for his schemes, and we start going around, and we maybe start declaring that to our other brothers and sisters. And little do we know, because we weren't protected, that we've become convinced that this is truth, that now we are trying to bring down all these other people, and we have no idea we're being used by Satan to do it. Because we are his greatest weapon, because people trust us. We're Christians. We gather together to worship God. We read his word. So if we're not doing our part on staying safe, then it's very easy for somebody to stumble because of what we have to say. So if we don't protect ourselves, we might bring down another. So it's very important for us. It's not just about our walk with the Lord, but it's about so many other individuals. Now we're going to skip the rest of the information. It gives details of what has happened to them, but if I don't go any further, we're going to totally miss what this message is supposed to be totally about. So verse 14. And Yahweh God said to the serpent, and I want to stop there for a second. We won't go there, but it's interesting that God doesn't talk to the serpent. He doesn't allow him to have dialogue with him. He just curses him. Adam and Eve, he allows dialogue with them, and he never uses the word curse. He says that there's consequences for what they did, but he never curses Adam and Eve. All right. But he says to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all the beasts of the field. And again, I don't want us to miss this of the bigger picture of what is going on in the world. That it's not just the serpent, the snake that is cursed, or just Satan. It says, above all living or livestock and the beasts of the field. This curse because Adam and Eve had dominion over everything in the earth. The curse spread across everything of the earth. So everything was very good when God originally created it. Now we have animals wanting to eat each other, death, pain, and suffering happening in the world, even in the animal realm because of what Adam and Eve done. We know that from above all livestock and beasts of the earth. On your belly you shall go, and the dust of the earth you shall eat all the days of your life. It's cool, the concept. Not only is a snake so low to the ground that, literally it's going to get dust in its mouth, but it's neat how its tongue sticks out to sense the world around it, puts it into its mouth, sticks it up into two little sensory glands to analyze the molecules. So literally when dust is on its tongue, it sticks it in its mouth. It kind of actually does eat dust, though that's probably not the main intent of what this verse is trying to say. But we see then this idea, because of what has happened here, this is an idea that is throughout history, especially with the Hebrew people, of to eat dust was a place of humility and of being beaten. And it probably stems from this, of God's original curse to the serpent. Verse 15 is where we really find the hope. In the midst of this curse, where God is declaring everything you know is now fallen apart, he tells this to the serpent. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. He starts off by telling the serpent, I will. It's not a thing that humanity is told that they need to enact or to do, or even Adam and Eve, but it's something that God declares himself, this is what I am going to do. He says, I'm going to put enmity between you and the woman, and from your offspring and her offspring. Because see, Eve built this relationship with the serpent. He convinced her to take off God's truth and to put on his truth. They created this bond. God says, no, that cannot happen. I will not let the evil one come in and have this dominion over humanity. He says, you know what? I'm breaking up that friendship. And there's going to be a fight between you two. And because he brings in the language of the offspring, he's basically telling Satan, you're going to have a super long battle. In the end, you're going to ultimately lose. Because this is going to go across generations. And that was probably important for Eve to hear. Whether she really understood it at the time or not, probably not. If you're anything like us, their minds were probably swirling at this moment. But on recollection, she could have some understanding of going, wait a minute, I'm going to have offspring. This isn't an immediate death thing. And this promise that is going to be coming, that he's going to say next, is more than just for Adam and Eve. Because he mentions that it's going to be something that deals with offspring, future generations to come. And so they know that God is going to be working with humanity for a little bit longer. And again, I don't think probably Eve understood all that when it was first coming. But us, being able to sit back and contemplating these words and understand that, wow, this is bigger than them. And then it's interesting how God words this. He shall bruise your head. He just went from the language of offspring, being the word that would be literally seed, and we see that being used throughout the Bible, the importance of it. It comes back up with Abraham. New Testament emphasis on the word seed. But then he goes singular. And he says, from the woman, he will bruise the head of the serpent. Singular. So there was one individual that was going to come from the line of the woman that was going to ultimately destroy the head of the serpent. And it's interesting there as well. It's back to one individual. Your head. He's talking directly to the serpent again, not to the descendants. So what this serpent represents is still going to be living at the time that this future descendant of Eve is going to come about. Your head, serpent, and I tell you that snake didn't live for eternity, but the one who was dwelling within him, Satan, was there. And God was telling him, your head is going to be crushed by this one that is to come. And you shall bruise his heel. Now I was amazed when I was looking at this. There's a lot going on in this passage, and we're not going to be able to unpack all of it. But the big picture then is the person, and I forgot my illustration, but it was the victor standing with his foot over the neck of his opponent who has been knocked down, standing there in victory, with the head crushed underneath him. And obviously we understand the ultimate picture there is what Christ did. Christ had taken out Satan by defeating him with the death on the cross. The death had been destroyed, and the work of Satan had been destroyed. But obviously Christ was marred in that as well. In essence, his heel in the battle was bruised by the serpent, and that Satan was able to get Christ crucified on this earth. Horrible. But because of the power of Christ and the work, and we read throughout the New Testament that it was a part of the Trinity, the Holy Spirit, God the Father, and Jesus are all a part of raising him back to life. So God didn't stay dead, and that is how Christ has overcome the victory over Satan. Yes, Satan dealt a blow to the Savior, but he wasn't able to conquer him. And the ultimate victory is Christ standing over the head of Satan in defeat. It doesn't give us all the details of the promise that is to come, but it's that first ray of hope that they have when everything fell apart for mankind. And God is going to spend the rest of the gospel message, the entirety of the Bible, explaining to us and revealing a little bit more detail. What is this Savior going to look like, and how is this ultimately going to affect humanity? He starts it back at the very beginning. See, it's understanding the fall, what God had originally created, and understanding how humanity and its rebellion had destroyed it all, helps us to understand the gospel message. Without it, it's very confusing to understand, why did Christ have to die? Why am I even a sinner? It's important to know the very beginning and the foundation of that. And along with that, then we learn the role then of how God is good in the midst of a world with death, pain, and suffering. That God didn't create the world that way. That was a result of humanity's rebellion against him. So none of this stuff is God's fault. We learn that a holy God, for the good of the sinners, must judge sin and to keep his name holy. And that is what is being demonstrated with this. But he still brings up that promise and says, I'm not going to leave you alone in this. I'm going to save you. Let's pray. Dear Lord, we thank you that you didn't leave us in a state of rebellion to you. Your heart, even in the Garden of Eden, was that of protecting Adam and Eve, saying they cannot eat of the tree of life because I don't want them to live in this state forever in rebellion against me in this death, pain, and suffering. And so you cast them out. And until the time of the flood, you put an angel there to guard the gate to enter that garden so no human being could be stuck in this state. We even have movies of seeking for the fountain of youth. We still have that desire of everlasting life in this wicked and deprived world. But in your grace, Lord, you allow us to physically die so that we can be new again in your sight. And you give us this opportunity as we walk this life to be able to make that choice, to choose you. You ask us, Lord, to put on the belt of truth, and I pray, Lord, that we always hold tightly firm to your truth, and we put it on every day, and help that to refine the rest of our armor, our shield, our sword, our breastplate, and our helmet, and our feet, Lord, to be walking for you. Help us to stand against the schemes of the devil, because they're going to sound so correct. We honor you and praise you, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray.